Confession of Jack the Ripper. I must begin with a truth more inconvenient than any bloodstain. You will never know me. You search for a monster with a single face, a single name, a single shadow in a fog-choked alley of London. But I was not a ghost. I was not a phantom slipping between gaslights. I was a man who walked your streets in daylight, tipped his hat, shook hands, and signed documents. You called me Jack the Ripper because it was easier than admitting what I truly was. Familiar. I did not lurk in darkness all day. I had polished boots, a respectable coat, ink on my cuffs more often than blood. I spoke softly. I listened carefully. I was trusted in rooms where women were not allowed to speak. Whitechapel was not my home. It was my laboratory. I knew the layout of these streets better than most constables. I understood how long it took for patrols to turn corners. I knew which lamps flickered and which had gone dark. I knew which doorways concealed cries and which walls swallowed them. I knew because I studied systems for a living. You assume madness. That is comforting. Madness is random. I was not. I selected women who would not be missed by the powerful. Women whose disappearances would be explained away as vice and misfortune. The newspapers called them unfortunates. I called them variables. Yes, newspapers. You remember the letters, the taunts, the red ink, the signature. I did not need the notoriety. I needed the panic. Fear is a scalpel sharper than any blade. When Whitechapel trembled, funding shifted. Meetings were called. Proposals passed that would have otherwise gathered dust. You think the murders were the objective. They were leverage. The inconvenient truth is this. Institutions benefit from terror. You hunted butchers, sailors, foreigners, madmen. You never truly scrutinized men who attended official briefings about the investigation. You never questioned how certain details reached the press so swiftly. You never asked why someone seemed to know which rumors would spread the fastest. I stood in rooms where maps of the East End were pinned to the walls. I heard theories debated. I nodded solemnly at the brutality. And then I went home to wash beneath fingernails you would have called clean. You searched for a foreign accent. Mine was educated, measured, unremarkable. I knew anatomy beyond tavern knowledge, not because I was a crazed surgeon thirsting for gore, but because my profession required steady hands and clinical detachment. Flesh is flesh when you have been trained to see it as structure rather than soul. The first time, my hands shook. By the last, they did not. You want clues? Very well. I was older than most suspects imagined. Not a wild youth, but a man whose hair had begun to silver at the temples. I carried myself with authority. I had reason to be out late without suspicion. I owned a good overcoat, dark wool, well tailored. My boots were resoled frequently. I wrote well, too well. My handwriting changed when I wished it to. My spelling errors were deliberate. You believed in a deranged braggart. You missed the possibility of calculated theater. And when the killing stopped, you assumed I died, was imprisoned, or fled. I did none of those. Circumstances changed. My leverage had been achieved. The pressure I sought had mounted sufficiently. Continuing would have risked exposure without gain, so I ceased. Not from guilt, from prudence. That is the part that should chill you. A madman does not stop because his objective is met. A strategist does. You will say this is fantasy, that I am only another false confession echoing across time. Perhaps. But ask yourselves why certain files remain sealed for generations. Ask why suspicion drifted toward convenient scapegoats. Ask why the narrative of a lone lunatic proved so durable. History prefers monsters with no rank. If you wished for one last truth, I did not hate those women personally. I regarded them as expendable because society already had. That is the darkest confession of all. I merely exploited a hierarchy that existed long before I lifted a blade. You seek my name. Look not to the gutters of Whitechapel, but to the polished floors of committees and clinics. Look for a man who could command attention in 1888, who understood public hysteria, who could dissect both rumor and flesh. I will not sign this with a name you crave. You have spoken it in parliament halls, in medical colleges, and in drawing rooms, just not in accusation. And that, more than any knife, is what allowed me to vanish.